Hello there, world of tankers. Welcome to the channel. I'm your host, Droodles Blitz, and in today's video, I'll be ranking all of the tier 10s in Blitz. Now, you might be saying, why am I doing this again? I did a tier list a week ago doing all the tier 10s. Well, the difference is, today I'm ranking all of the noob friendly vehicles, and this tier list is going to be based off of the average to inexperienced player, not skilled players. If you're skilled, my previous tier list is probably going to be more beneficial to you, as my normal tier lists are based off of if you understand the tank's capabilities. But as my close friend NatPie pointed out, I should also make tier lists which are based for people that might not know how to play tanks properly. And I'm going to be ranking these vehicles from don't play, average strong, noob friendly, and then we have overpowered. And remember, this is specifically for noobs. This is specifically for people that aren't experienced. So the way that I rank these vehicles will probably be quite different from my previous tier list, although the vehicles that are obviously still really good will still probably make it quite high up. So with that being said, let's get straight into it. Starting off, we have the WZ114 SP2, a tier 10 Chinese collector heavy. And to be honest, I think the WZ114 SP2 is a pretty dang average vehicle for a skilled player. So if you're not the most skilled player and, you're pretty average, I mean, sure, it's got good damage per shot, but it's not very mobile. It doesn't have much armor, and it does hit hard, but because the accuracy is absolutely terrible, I'm going to put the 114 SP2 into the probably don't play category, to be entirely honest. And there's probably going to be a lot of vehicles in the don't play category today, but yeah. I think that's where we're going to put it. It can do okay, but, when you got vehicles like the E100 and the WZ113 GFT and other vehicles I'll be listing, I just don't really see much of a point to play the 114 unless you know how to use the armor properly. 116 F3, also going to be making it into the don't play category. I mean, first of all, the vehicle is a collector, which is going to cost you a lot of money to get your hands on, but as well, it doesn't have any mobility. Its armor is rather mediocre. Its gun is incredibly inaccurate. It has some of the worst on movement dispersion in tier 10, and there's really nothing exciting about the vehicle, so definitely in the don't play category. Now, the BZ75 is a rather interesting one, because there's a lot of different capabilities the BZ has. With the 130mm, I'm going to place the vehicle into average. With the 150mm, I'm going to place it into don't play. The 130mm on the vehicle is actually a pretty good gun. It has solid damage per shot, good penetration, good accuracy, and it's mounted on the hull with good mobility, 40 plus kilometer per hour, and it also gives you 8 degrees of gun depression. In general, it's actually quite a nice platform for the gun. Unfortunately, you don't have that much armor, so because of that, it's going in the average. The derp gun on the BZ is great if you know how to use it. Unfortunately, for most players, yeah, probably not going to be the best tank to mess around with if you don't know what you're doing. The WZ111-5A is also going to go into the average category. It has some great strengths. It has really good DPM, it's got solid gun depression, and solid mobility. Unfortunately, the armor of the vehicle is not very good. The penetration is quite bad. And because of that, once again, I think the average player is not going to do very well in the 5A. And that's also the same case for the 113. The 113 has the highest level of heat pen for a tier 10 heavy. It also has great levels of damage per minute, solid mobility, good upper plate armor, a good turret. It's got some great capabilities, and if you know what you're doing, the 113 can be absolutely amazing. But once again, for the average player to the beginner, this is not a good tank to play. I would not recommend it, so yeah. It's going into average. The WZ113 GFT is, oof. This one's probably going to make it into the OP category. It is the #1 win rate vehicle for the average player in Blitz. Believe it or not, I in fact recorded a video just a couple hours ago where I talked about the top 3 win rate tanks, and this is the #1. And it's because it is just brain dead. The level of frontal protection it has, paired with the high levels of penetration and good damage per minute, accuracy, all of that, combined create this just unstoppable brick. And it doesn't matter how unskilled you are. If you can aim at somebody and press the fire button, you're going to do pretty well in the WZ. Its armor is always going to be reliable. So, yeah, I'm going to leave it in the OP category. The WZ121 is our first medium to enter the fray. And the 121 is, well, it's got some good strengths. You know, it's got high alpha, it's got solid mobility, it's got some really good things going for it, but at the same time, it also has some big downsides. Poor gun depression, its ammo rack can be a weak spot. I'm going to put it into the average category. I do think it's actually quite a fun vehicle and definitely an exciting choice as a beginner medium. Although I would still recommend vehicles like the M48 Patton STB1 over something like the 121. The 121B is a little better, but I'd still put it into the average category because it doesn't have anything that's really going to help you as a beginner, right? It's got, adaptive concealment, which is nice. It's got solid levels of damage per minute, solid turret armor, good mobility. It's kind of like a 121, but you have lower alpha, but you gain in the damage per minute department, a little bit in the accuracy, and you have that adaptive concealment, which is very nice. I like the 121B. I think it's a great tank, but again, not a good choice for a beginner. The WZ-132-1, definitely going into the don't play category. As a skilled player, the 132-1 is one of the most capable tanks in the game. Unfortunately for beginners, this is a very, very bad choice. Once again, it has no armor. It follows the same Chinese doctrine of very poor gun depression. And when you pair those two things together with bad ammo rack, durability, a terrible fuel tank, it's not a good player if you're an inexperienced, or not a good tank if you're an inexperienced player. Yeah, definitely stay far away from the 132-1. 60 TP will go into the noob friendly category. I think it is quite a easy tank for a beginner to play. It's got solid hull armor, it's got high alpha, it's got a fantastic turret, it's got a lot of hit points, high damage per shot, tungsten, adrenaline, gear oil. It's kind of got it all. You can put this tank in any position. You're going to do fairly well. You are always going to have that opportunity to outtrade your opponents. In general, I think the 60 TP is one of the best beginner tanks. It's just an absolutely fantastic vehicle and definitely something I would recommend to consider trying out. The Caro 45 ton is another vehicle that I would consider to be in the noob friendly category. Yes, if you're completely stupid and you don't understand what a reserve shell is, then yeah, maybe in like the average to don't play. But as long as you have half a brain cell and you can understand that dumping your last shell, which is going to give you a 20-second reload, isn't a smart idea, you'll do fine in the Caro. It's got a 3-shell clip with 380 damage per shot. You can use that reserve shell when you need. It's got decent mobility, gear oil, high alpha for a medium. It's a really, really good tank in general, and it doesn't matter if you're bad at the game, it doesn't matter if you're good at the game. In general, a Caro can be a very big threat due to that clipping potential it has. The Lion, I would probably put into the don't play category. It doesn't have a great amount of speed at 50 kilometers per hour, and while its gun can be rather dangerous, it's not a very scary tank for somebody that doesn't know what they're doing. It can be very easily taken out, especially because of the reserve shell only being 3 shells in instead of 4 like the Caro. Definitely a vehicle that can do well, but requires somebody to do well in it, if that makes sense. CS63, again, don't play. There's really no point. It doesn't have armor. Its DPM is solid, but with no turret armor and really nothing standout amazing about the vehicle, there are so many better mediums to play. I don't really think the average player is going to do very well in a CS. It's a fun tank, to be fair. It has tungsten, it has reticle calibration, it has gear oil. It's kind of got it all, but you have to know what to do with those consumables and with the tank's capabilities on the front line to still do a decent job, which is why I'm putting it into the don't play category. The Kron, I'm definitely going to do the strong position. I don't think the Kron is incredibly noob friendly. First of all, the more shells you fire, the less damage per minute you have. It goes from 2,700 down to like 2,100 when you shoot your clip. Not only that, the vehicle is only good when using gun depression, and I cannot tell you how many times I've seen players not understand this. They will drive it on flat ground, miss their shots, bounce their poor levels of penetration, and die. And yeah, the tank does have pretty poor levels of pen. If you're not running calibrated, you're going to run into a lot of problematic situations. The Kron is still a great tank. I think you'll do better in it than, all the vehicles down here, but because of the fact people don't think for themselves and use it in a hull down position, I don't think it's an incredibly noob-friendly vehicle, but I do think that it's closer. It's pretty solid. The Minnow, easy OP. It's the second highest win rate tier 10 in the game. It's incredibly noob friendly. The vehicle has ridiculous levels of frontal protection. It has high alpha damage. It has good gun depression. It even has pretty solid mobility and a semi-traversable turret. In general, I would say the Minotauro is one of the best tier 10s for a beginner. If you're looking for a heavy but better, this is kind of the way to go. I would definitely recommend to grind the Minnow. The Progetto 65, we're going to put into the average category. It's kind of like a Lion, but you don't have a reserve shell, which is actually quite nice. It's got a 3-shell clip. It's fairly mobile. It's got a really troll upper plate, which allows you to get bounces, but you do lose damage per minute when dumping your clip. You do have a very weak turret, and in general, you will be quickly destroyed if you make an over-aggression. So because of that, while I do think the Progetto is actually a fairly good beginner vehicle, and if you're going for auto reloaders, it's probably the best auto reloader to grind to get used to how the mechanic works. At the same time, I do think that the Progetto is still a fairly experience-oriented vehicle. The Renat Charente, I'm going to put actually into the strong category. Even though it doesn't have great hull armor, it still has a double shot gun, which can deal a pretty solid amount of damage. 420, 840 in total, because it's a double shot, so it does a lot of damage. It's got solid mobility, solid gun depression. It's a fantastic tank in general. It's one of my favorite auto reloaders. It's really just an amazing tank. It's kind of like a Progetto, but you just turn it into a heavy. And because of that, it's a little bit better, a little bit more effective. It still obviously is plagued with downsides. The hull armor, the track wheels, even the modules are pretty weak. And if you don't know what you're doing, you can fall apart quickly. But I think it's a pretty good vehicle, and definitely not a bad shout if you want to mess again with auto reloaders as a beginner. The Stridsvon K, don't play if you're not good at the game, if you're fairly inexperienced. The vehicle, you know, it has decent mobility. It's got some of the highest DPM for a heavy, but at the same time, its armor is very average. You're only going to be able to get bounces if you're using it with gun depression. You have to understand when to drive it to the heavy flank, when to drive it to the medium flank. The penetration is not very good. There's a lot of things that are not very good about the Stridsvon, which definitely take away from the enjoyment you can have as a beginner. The TVP, don't play. Please stop playing the TVP. If you're one of those people that presses battle with the TVP, YOLOs into the open, kills themselves in the first 20 seconds, and then just does nothing, I don't know what to say, bro. I swear every single TVP player does this. The tank is meant to be played passive. It is meant to wait for the enemy to make a mistake, and then you punish them, reload, reposition, and do it again. Unfortunately, bad players don't understand this, and because of that, they do very bad in the tank. I think it's one of the worst beginner vehicles to use in the game. Yes, it can be punishing, but it's also punishing for the driver. The VZ55, I would put into the noob-friendly category. The VZ has some great mechanics. It's got an incredibly strong upper plate, a solid turret. It's quite HE resistant. Not only that, the vehicle has a really good gun. 460 damage per shot. It has 2 shells. It's a double shot, so it can deal 920 damage in total. And not to mention, it has incredible levels of penetration, 7 degrees of gun depression, and even combat stabilization, allowing it to be quite accurate even on the move. It's also fairly mobile. In general, the VZ is a great autoloader, and definitely a vehicle I would recommend for beginners to get used to. The Balshation 25-ton is going into the don't play category again. It's a light tank. It's one of the trickier light tanks. I mean, sure, it's got a clip. It's got great mobility. It's a fantastic tank for a beginner. But unfortunately, at the same time, the major problem with the Balshation is you have to understand mechanics like camouflage. You have to understand that, well, your armor's not very good and people are going to focus you. It's just like a TVP. You have to put yourself in positions where you punish somebody, reposition, flank, do it again and again and again. And the more skilled you are, the more effective you are in these types of tanks. So, yeah, I'm going to put it into the don't play category. The Projet Marat will actually go into the average. It's a double shot, kind of like the Barask. And believe it or not, the Barask is the #1 win rate tier 8 in the game right now when it comes to mediums. And I think the Marat is also a pretty similar character. It's got, you know, 370 damage per shot, a double shot gun, solid gun depression, good mobility. It does have the downside of being freaking huge, and it's got some big weaknesses, but at the same time, I think that it's actually a fairly fun vehicle. The whole line itself is great to grind. The tier 7 through 10, all of them are great. They all have solid guns, high levels of pen. In general, I think the Marat is a really enjoyable tank. So yeah, I'm going to put it into the average category. The AMX 30B is going to go into the don't play. It's just a Leopard 1, but worse in most situations. I mean, yes, it has slightly better armor, which technically does make it more noob-friendly, but at the same time, the 30B still features some major drawbacks like poor DPM, armor that isn't very good. And I mean, those two drawbacks alone definitely hurt it. It's not great for skilled players, so if it's not great for the highest level of players, it's definitely not going to be great for the lowest level of players. 50B? Average. The 50B does have reactive armor. It does have a super high damaging clip, but it also has terrible levels of armor. It is not a good beginner tank. It is not a vehicle I would recommend for the average player to say, gee, I want to grind that as a beginner. The 57 Heavy is a much better shout as an autoloader, and why go for a 57 when you can get the Rhino, the Kron, or the VZ? It's kind of how I see it, especially with like the Minnow. The Minnow is really your gateway into the auto loading and auto reloading mechanics. That's definitely going to be one of your best shouts. Next tank is an interesting one. We got the Foch and the Foch, well, both guns. We got the autoloader and the single shot. We'll start off with the single shot. I'm going to put that into average, and the autoloader we'll put into strong. I think that the Foch is a fairly decent beginner vehicle. It's not great because obviously it has very weak side armor, but it has a super, super high clipping potential. It has very good frontal protection, enough to get a lot of bounces, especially if you're a noob MM. Holy, people are going to be bouncing that thing like crazy. It's got great mobility, gear oil, tungsten. It's kind of got it all. I think the Foch is a fantastic tank. Plus, as you get better, you're really going to learn to enjoy that thing. It's great at YOLOing. You know, you see the TVP players YOLOing. Get a Foch. At least you can YOLO with it. We have the AMX M4, average. The gun sucks on the AMX, but it sucks for skilled players, so probably can't be any worse for somebody who snaps their shots all games. I mean, hey, all the 183 players seem to snap their shots and hit me every time, so can't be that bad. AMX M4 has great gun depression, solid mobility. It's got really, really good frontal protection. The problem is it's a large tank, and it's very, very easy to shoot. If you're looking over here and somebody's over at this position, they're easily going to be able to hit you, which is definitely a problem you're going to run into a lot with the AMX. I would not say it's a good beginner vehicle. I would actually say it's rather poor. The E100, both guns are very solid. I would say the 15 centimeter is definitely noob friendly. It's got high levels of pen, high alpha damage, and a lot of hit points. And those are three things that you want as a beginner, because you can just drive out into the open, go ka-chunk, and back into cover. And because of that, yeah, E100 does a pretty good job. The 12.8 I'm going to put into strong. I don't think it's as good for a beginner, mainly because of the fact, yes, while the 12.8 does have more DPM, it also gives you a lot less scare factor. You know, when somebody's using the 660 alpha gun on the E100, you're a little scared, but that's not the case when they're using the 12.8. It's not nearly as scary, and you also have much worse premium pen, which is something that will affect you as a beginner, so probably stick with the higher caliber gun. It's going to be a better choice. The E50M is, I would say, noob friendly. I'm not going to say OP, but I definitely think in the noob friendly category. The level of protection it features is great. You can make mistakes in a medium, and you can still get away with it. The mobility is fantastic. You can very easily position from A to B. It's got great levels of damage per minute, has reactive armor if you know how to use it. In general, the E50M is a fantastic medium and will get the job done very easily. So really, really solid pick. We have the Grill 15. The Grill, don't play. It's very simple. It has no armor. It has very little flexibility. And if you don't know what you're doing, it's probably one of the worst picks. It's always crazy to me that the Grill is one of the most played tank destroyers, when it is also one of the weakest tank destroyers. There are many better picks. The Hovri, for example, is a much better pick than the Grill for a beginner. So yeah, I don't think the Grill is actually a very good beginner tank destroyer. The Waffenträger Alpha 100, again, don't play it. It's a terrible tank if you're a beginner. In fact, I think it's probably the worst tank in the game if you're new and inexperienced. So I'm not even going to talk too much about it. You can see many of my reviews. It's not a good beginner vehicle. It's not a tank I'd recommend for many people to play, let alone the inexperienced. The Jagdpanzer E100, yeah, don't play. Once again, Jag is high alpha. It has a decent amount of armor, but at the end of the day, it is slow. It is terrible on camo values, and most of the time you're going to find yourself caught out in the open, put in a position you don't want. Yes, super heavies are pretty good for beginners. In fact, super heavies are the highest win rate class for beginners. But the Jag is, well, it's a super heavy without a turret, which is just not good if you're not good at the game. So while it does have some capabilities, yeah, don't get it. Kampfpanzer 50 ton, I'm going to put into the average category. It has great mobility, super high DPM, it has strong armor, but at the same time, it has a very poor turret, which can be penetrated with most standard to gold rounds, and not to mention, its gun can be a little wonky on its accuracy, which is not always the best thing. Plus, if you're running tungsten and adrenaline, you're going to have no repair kits, which means you might run into some tricky situations. It's definitely a dangerous tank, but I, again, think it's pretty average for most players. Leopard 1, don't play. even though I think the Leopard 1 is a fantastic tier 10 right now and one of the most dangerous in the game, Blitz analysis shows it still as the worst performing tank for the average player in tier 10. It's one of the most played mediums, but it's also the worst performing, and it's simple to understand. It has 7 degrees of gun depression, which isn't great for a medium, and when you pair that with the non-existent armor and the super high DPM, it puts this mindset into players that, oh, I have more DPM than you, I can get away with playing aggressive. No, you can't. The Leopard is a passive, farming, almost tank destroyer like medium. No, you should not camp in it, but you also should not frontline. You should be midline, farming, repositioning, flanking, doing things like that. It's basically a light tank on steroids. So because of that, it's great if you know how to use light tanks. Unfortunately, most beginners don't. They think the vehicle's great due to the high DPM, and they end up suffering in it. You will do much better in vehicles like the E50M than you will in a Leopard 1. The mouse, OP. Believe it or not, the mouse is the 3rd highest win rate average vehicle. Like, I know, it's crazy. The mouse for skilled players is one of the worst tanks for winning. But if you're an average player, believe it or not, the mouse is great. Why? Well, there's a lot of reasons. First of all, it has a boatload of health and it's slow. That means it's very hard for you to accelerate your demise. If you're a bad player and you're driving a TVP or a Leopard, guess what? Meow, dead. Because you can drive right into the front line and kill yourself. But driving a mouse, well, it's really not that big of a problem because you're too slow to kill yourself fast enough. And if you do end up dying, at least you're acting as an HP sponge for your team. So it is actually a great vehicle for beginners to get used to. Unfortunately, it's not a great vehicle to increase your skill level in because really the mouse doesn't play like any other tank. So I wouldn't really recommend to grind it as a beginner unless you want that big ol' hongler bongler playstyle, but it is a fun tank. VK72, average. While it is a super heavy, at the end of the day, the E100 is a much better choice. The VK72 has very bad side scraping capabilities, its track wheel is a massive weak spot, and the DPM is incredibly poor, making it a rather easy target to pick apart, especially over a distance. While it is a very cool looking super heavy, I really don't think it's a solid shout. However, the VK90, I think, is going into the noob friendly category. It's got some of the highest standard levels of pen, almost 300 mils of AP. It has really good accuracy due to combat stabilization, allowing it to be very accurate on the move. It has a decent top speed of 30, which is quite good for a super heavy. It's got a good power to weight ratio, 10 degrees of gun depression over the sides, crazy good side scraping armor, and I feel like side scraping is one of the most basic things that even most beginners and noobs do understand at least a little bit of, and the VK90 is a great way to understand the concept even better. So I would definitely recommend that the VK90 is a vehicle that noobs consider picking up if they're going to get a collector. The Hori is going to go into noob friendly as well. The Hori has the highest level of pens in tier 10, which means you don't have to worry or struggle to penetrate through enemy armor. It's got decent mobility. It has reactive armor. It has sandbags. In general, it's a really, really strong tank. It can snap shots. It's kind of got it all going for it in general. A really, really good vehicle. STB1, do I think this is a good beginner vehicle? No, I think it's a good average tank, mainly because of the fact, yeah, it's got really good gun depression, but its DPM and holding potential are a little bit on the lower side right now. As a skilled player, I can do very well in the STB, but as a beginner, I can imagine this is not a great tank for you. Again, I think the Patton is just a flat better tank. And you know, I keep talking about the Patton. Let's rank it. It's right here. I'm going to put the Patton into the I'm going to put it into the OP category for a beginner. I think it's the only medium that's going to make it into the OP category, but I really think it's the best beginner medium. Yeah, I know the E50M is great, and there's going to be a lot of people like, how can you say the M48 Patton's better than the E50? But at the end of the day, the M48 has turret armor, and the E50 doesn't. Yes, I know the E50 does technically have turret armor, but literally just loading gold, if your shells go into the cheeks, they're going to pen. That's not the case for the M48 Patton, and the M48 has a much more simple playstyle. Because of that, I think it's one of the best beginner mediums to get understanding of the playstyle, capabilities, and how to use it. Keeping in line with the OP category, we have the Type 71. Type is an incredibly good beginner tank. Why? First of all, it has 362 millimeters of AP premium if you're running calibrated shells. It has a pretty good amount of mobility. It's got some of the trollest armor in the game. In general, the Type 71 is one of the best tier 10s for a beginner. It's a very fun grind. The Type 68, which is the tier 9, is great. The Juto, the Junu, all are very, very good vehicles. In general, I think the entire line, Chisei, the whole line is great. So I would definitely recommend to consider grinding the Type 71. It's probably the best of the heavies. Chieftain Mark 6. Don't play. It has a Hesh gun. Hesh is not a thing that you should be messing with as a beginner, mainly down to the fact the vehicle really is a skill-based tank. The 215B, same thing. You know, it's got super high DPM. It has a Hesh firing gun. It also has APCR. It's a great tank, but it's one of the most skill-based vehicles in the game, so I wouldn't recommend the average player to use the 215B. The 4202, once again, same thing. I wouldn't recommend the average player to use the 4202. It has Hesh. You need to understand how to use Hesh, how to properly use the tank to do well in it. It doesn't have much turret armor as well, which means that most people are going to butter right through you while you're struggling with that gun. So, yeah, don't play it, at least in my personal opinion. FE2 and 5B183, don't play it. The 183, sure, it's got some great capabilities. You know, it's got 950 damage per shot. It's got Hesh, which has 1200 damage. Unfortunately for you, you're not really going to be able to use those mechanics all too much. I mean, sure, you might get a decent game in the 183 every now and then, but it's going to be followed by a subsequent terrible game every single time. If you're not very good at the tank, usually what's going to happen is you're going to fire one shell, you're going to get spotted and blasted by everybody into smithereens. It is a decent tank if you understand how to use it. I actually put it in strong in my tier list when it comes to the average or decent players, but unfortunately, that's not you. So, yeah, I'm going to put it into the don't play category. The Badger is going to go into noob friendly. The Badger is actually the 4th highest win rate, or maybe the 5th. It's in the top 5 of win rate for tanks, and it makes sense why. It's got really good frontal protection, high levels of DPM, great levels of penetration, and 10 degrees of gun depression. It's kind of got it all. Yeah, its traverse speed is really, really bad, but as long as you can keep your opponents in a straight line, you're going to be fine, and it actually does a really, really good job. I was surprised to see the Badger, but also not surprised at the same time. 4005, I mean, it's a glass cannon. It has no armor whatsoever. It sacrifices everything for that clipping potential. It's the same problem as the Waffenträger. It is not a good beginner tank. Once again, yes, you can get some very dangerous clips out, but why drive a 4005 when you can drive a 50B, which has reactive armor? The Super Conqueror, definitely in the OP category. I think it's one of the best beginner tanks in the game, just like the Type 71. It's got really good frontal protection, solid levels of penetration, great levels of DPM, some of the best on movement dispersion in tier 10, 10 degrees of gun depression. It's got reactive armor. Oof, and it's got even pretty good mobility. In general, the Super Conch is really as brain dead as you can get, right up there next to the Type. I mean, the tanks in the OP category are about as brain dead as you can get, so that's why they're there. Vickers Light, yeah, don't play it, really. Just don't. I mean, if you're a decent player, it's a fun tank, but unfortunately, for the average player, again, it's a light tank, and light tanks really aren't a good choice, especially now that the vehicle doesn't get heat. It's really not a fantastic choice. Concept 1B, average. It does have really, really good turret armor. It has solid DPM, but the average player doesn't really know how to use it that effectively, and you'd be better off with a vehicle like an IS-7 or a Type 71 where you can just drive and have your armor do a better job and work a lot more for you. Next up, we have the Yos. We have the M6 with the double shot and the triple shot, and both of these tanks are going to go into the average category. I do think that both of them are quite scary. Autoloaders in general are really dangerous tanks, but if you don't know what you're doing, the Yo can be a very easy tank to catch out. It doesn't have great hull armor, it's got big hatches, which can be very easily penned, and the vehicle in general isn't the fastest. It's only really dangerous when you're able to use that double or triple shot effectively. But yeah, because of that, average. M60, I'll put it into noob friendly. It's kind of like the E50M in the fact that it's got solid gun depression, decent DPM, and good turret armor. Unfortunately, it's just not as good as the Patton, but I still think it's a noob friendly vehicle, you know? it's a Patton. Pattons are inherently just like the E5. They're quite basic in their playstyle, which allows them to be pretty noob friendly. The T110E3, also noob friendly. It is a tank destroyer, which you drive to a haul down spot, oonga boonga, there you go, you've done your job. All you have to do is hide your lower plate, and congrats, most people aren't going to be able to pen you. When you pair that with solid levels of damage per minute and high levels of alpha and penetration, yeah, the E3 does a good job. It's just literally a bunker on wheels. That's really all it is. E4, average. It's a decent tank destroyer, due to the fact it's got obviously the high alpha and the DPM and even pretty solid power to weight, but unfortunately its very poor reverse speed and rather non-existent gun depression do make it a really tricky tank for the average player. I still think that it's decent, but I would recommend the E3 over the E4 if you're a beginner. The better you get at the game, the more you'll realize the E4 is a better tank. E5, yeah, definitely noob friendly. I mean, it's just great. It's got gun depression, it's got DPM, it's got mobility, it's got armor, it's got it all. It's basically the jack of all trades when it comes to heavies. It's probably one of the best beginner heavies in the game, so definitely one I would consider to recommend people to go for. 57 Heavy is also a fairly decent vehicle. The clipping potential is great, 1200 damage, but the major reason why it goes quite high up is because of the fact it has really troll armor. It doesn't matter how skilled you are, shooting at a 57 Heavy is always a die roll, whether the shell is going to pen or not. And because of that, I think that noobs get away with a lot of goofy bounces that they really shouldn't in this tank, and when you pair that with the fact they have high DPM, good accuracy, and a super dangerous clip, I think the 57 Heavy deserves to be in strong. We have the T95E6. Don't play. I mean, it's a really, really good tank, but only for people that know what they're doing. For the average player, yeah, that's where it's going. Sheridan. Sheridan's actually going to be noob friendly. It's the only light tank that's going to make it into the noob friendly category, but I wanted to put one light somewhere that was decent, and by far the Sheridan is the best of the bunch for beginners. It has the highest alpha, it has the most premium penetration, it has really good view range, mobility, it cannot be high explosive penned. And when you pair all that with the fact that it's just this little derp gun, it's quite the dangerous vehicle. If you're a beginner and you want to experience a light tank, the Sheridan is really the only choice that I would recommend. The other ones are definitely a lot harder to use, so that's kind of how I see it. We're not going to talk about the Sheridan missile because that tank isn't even in pubs. XM66F, noob friendly. It's got great mobility, 40 kilometer per hour top speed, reverses at 20. It's got high levels of DPM, very, very troll armor. And even if you get tracked, it has a reserve track mechanic, which allows you to still reverse even after your track wheels are broken. Pair that with 3,500 DPM and pretty good alpha at 410, great levels of pen and decent accuracy. Yeah, I think the XM is a really, really good noob-friendly vehicle. IS4, average. It's kind of the same as the 5A, you know, it's got rather mediocre hull armor. The on-movement dispersion of the IS-4 is absolutely tragic, and while it does have a decent turret, I can't imagine most noobs will understand how to use that turret armor properly. So if you're a beginner and you're watching this, probably don't go for the IS-4. Much rather tell you to recommend the IS-7, which I'm going to put into the OP category for inexperienced players. Why? Its armor is insane, right? The upper plate, super troll. The turret has virtually no weak spots frontally. It has no hatch. You just have to pen it through the cheeks if you have enough. And the side armor is ridiculously troll. It doesn't matter how skilled you are, you will bounce the side of an IS-7 if your RNG doesn't like you. When you pair that with the fact the vehicle is fairly mobile, has very good alpha damage, and tungsten, yeah, the IS-7 in general is just one of the best beginner tanks. It's an absolutely amazing vehicle. Object 140, don't play, no armor. It's got DPM, but it has literally no armor. It's got no gun depression. Compare those two things together, you got a recipe for disaster. Object 260, don't play. It's basically the Object 140 turned into a medium. It's basically the least armored heavy in tier 10. You might say the E6, but at least the E6 got 10 degrees of gun depression. 260 has poor heat pen. It's got APCR standard. It has no gun depression. And the only thing it's really got is mobility, which is all right, but at that point, just go for a better heavy, in my opinion. Go for something like a Rhino, go for an E5, go for a Type. You'll be a lot better off. 263, 4 degrees of gun depression. Don't play. Object 268 version 4, OP. It really is the most OP noob tank. First of all, if you're noob matchmaking, which means you're under 5,500 games and you're watching today's video, you're going to be fighting people that are equal to your skill level, which means they're probably going to be fairly inexperienced. They're not going to know what they're doing, and they're going to, well, not know how to pen the V4 effectively. So because of that, the armor is insane. It's actually, I think it was the 4th highest, and then the Badger was the 5th highest. So yeah, the V4 is in the top 5 win rate of tanks in tier 10, and it makes sense. It's brain dead, you know? For skilled players, it might not be the best, but it's got high alpha, solid DPM, and good mobility. And when you pair all that with stupid good armor for a beginner, it's a great tank. Object 268, strong. I think it's a good tank destroyer for a beginner to learn how camo works, how to position it in decent spots and everything like that. So overall, yeah, I'm gonna put the 268 in the strong. 777, average. It's got really good top speed. It's got high levels of DPM, great penetration, but very, very poor traverse speed, and not to mention a very poor ammo rack, which can be rather problematic. The Object 907, average. It is a fun medium. It's got tracer shells, which is fantastic. It has good gun depression. It's got good mobility, but at the end of the day, it's a fairly skill-requiring vehicle, which is why it's not going to make it any higher. T100 LT, strong. It's not as good as the Sheridan in terms of beginner capabilities, but I do think it is a fairly good tank. Again, if you want to be a newer player that wants to like light tanks, it's got tracer shells, it's got mobility, super troll armor. It's a tiny profile with the best camo for a light tank in tier 10. Very fun tank. T22 medium. I take it back. There is actually 2 mediums going into the OP category. I think we can all agree that T22 is one of the most brain-dead mediums. It has super troll armor, especially after Wargaming buffed it on the upper plate and the sides to a point now where even if you're a skilled player, sometimes your shells are just going to ricochet. It's a really, really troll tank. 62A is the last vehicle, and it's going to go into the average. It's an average medium, right? It's got nothing really special about it. So there you go, ladies and gentlemen. That is my tier list for average to beginner players. Let me know your personal feelings, comments, and opinions down below. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.